Hello everyone, welcome back to another video where today I want to talk a little bit about Season 2 or Series 15, whichever you prefer, and how I believe it can improve on the latest season that's just passed, which if you've seen my last video you'll know I enjoyed, but I had a fair few issues with. If you want to know more about those, I'll leave a card in the corner for you to go and check that out. But this video is going to be all about what I would do for a follow-up season for Ncuti Gatwa. Obviously we know it's already filmed, so I'm not expecting this to move the needle particularly, but these are the things I would do if I was in a position to make any changes for Season 2. These things aren't going to be things that won't happen, so for example, we know that Season 2 will also be 8 episodes, which would have been one of my suggestions for a Season 2 is have more episodes, but obviously that's not something that is a possibility this time around. Maybe for Season 3 it will be. It's going to be my realistic kind of hopes for what could be changed and improved upon for Season 2. But subscribe if you're new, that'd be greatly appreciated. We are trying to get to 25,000 subscribers, and any support would be greatly appreciated on that front. I'm making regular Doctor Who content, so if that's your thing, feel free to subscribe. But let's get right into it. So my first point, and you're going to have to bear with me on this a little bit, but I hope it makes sense. I would like some more traditional stories. Now, when I say traditional stories, that's a difficult thing to quantify because Doctor Who throughout its history has had frequently different formats and formulas. But when I talk about a traditional bread and butter Doctor Who episode, what I'm referring to is the Doctor and Companion go somewhere, land somewhere, find some sort of alien happening, and deal with it, you know, maybe it's what Base Under Siege type thing, something like that. Some more traditional episodes in that vein. And the reason I'm making that request here is because as much as I love a lot of the experimentation of Season 1 with episodes like 73 Yards and Dot and Bubble that are not only Doctor Light, but in some ways completely different in terms of format, and even stories like Devil's Cord, incorporating more musical elements, as much as I do enjoy a lot of that in terms of ideas, I do think we need some more stories that do function as your bread and butter standard Doctor Who stories for an audience. You could argue that the new status quo is these experimental stories, but I think for a normal audience, they need some level of grounding. And I think this is something that previous series, due to partially higher episode counts, managed to do really well. With Series 4, you'd have stories like Turn Left, like Midnight, that were more experimental, but they would be supplemented by stories like Planet of the Ood, The Unicorn and the Wasp, Fires of Pompeii. They were relatively traditional in style, whereas with Season 1, you've got stories like Dot and Bubble and 73 Yards and Devil's Cord making up the lion's share of the series. And I'm not saying I want to see the removal of these episodes, not at all. I enjoy a lot of them. But I think some more traditional episodes would be welcome now that we're in a second series. The next point I have is a bit of a sort of one or the other situation. I'm kind of giving you a choice here, like Neo from The Matrix with the 2 pills. Either less arc stuff, so in Season 1's case that would be the Susan Triad and Ruby's parentage stuff, that sort of thing, or more serialization. And the reason I say this is because I don't believe the 8 episode format is enough to do both single episodic stories that feel satisfying within 45 minutes and do arc maintenance stuff. I don't think the two can really gel well together in such a short span of episodes. So either, I would say, drop more of the arc stuff, maybe have one major arc that's kind of subtly hinted at throughout the series, or maybe don't have an arc at all, and just focus on individual episodes. I don't think that'll happen, given that we know that Mrs. Flood and the Harbinger return in this season. Or, I think the more likely option, and I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on this, because when I floated this idea before, people have been a little bit unsure about it. More serialization, so something more akin to Flux, where there's one overarching story with little threads throughout each episode. I would have it be a bit more coherent than that, to be blunt, but I think for modern TV, particularly being binged a lot, I think adding more serialization wouldn't necessarily be a bad shout. The counter-argument to that is that people will say you might lose some individual episodes, and I do understand that, and I do think as well, if serialization is done poorly, it can result in the individual stories feeling less rewatchable. That certainly was the case for me with Flux, where I'd like stories like War of the Centaurans to a certain extent, but I never really want to go back to them because of how heavily tied in they are to Flux, which I'm not overly keen on. But I think it is worth taking the risk for a season 2, and I think if you are moving more in the streaming direction, which Doctor Who seems to be, serialization might be a good idea in terms of that audience. My third point, and this one is probably the most important point on this list, is I want them to focus more on the character drama. Now, I wasn't expecting to say this pre-season 1, but I don't think that had enough focus in the actual season that we got, and I was surprised by that for Russell. He's normally really good at the character drama and the family drama and sort of conflicts between the Doctor and companion and wanting to travel and not wanting to travel and all the rest of that stuff, and that just isn't really a factor in season 1, and I think that's a shame. And I'd like to see that pushed a lot more to the front and centre with season 2. I think there is potential to do that in season 2. I think it'd be interesting if, now that we know that Verada Cethu is joining the TARDIS, and we also know that Millie Gibson's Ruby Sunday is coming back, it'd be interesting to see maybe 2 companions that don't quite see eye to eye on some things. I think that would be quite interesting. I think just some more drama between the characters would be very welcome for me, because season 1 has felt largely pretty buddy, everyone's getting along, which is nice, but I want to see some fights. I love, might be controversial, but school reunion, the way that Sarah Jane and Rose kind of compete with each other, I always found that a fun dynamic, and I kind of want to see a bit more of that again. Not in a romantic sense, but more so in a battle of ideas kind of sense. Or at the very least, battle of personalities. Like, say maybe Ruby is quite, brash and youthful, and maybe Verada's character is a bit more quiet and wants to think things through a little bit more, and that creates some tension. I'd also like to see more family stuff, i.e. not just with Sundays, but also whoever Verada's family are as well. I just think Russell writes families really well. This one is more of a fun one, but I wanted to include it because it's another one that I wasn't expecting to say, but I would like to see some returning villains for season 2, now that we've had a series that was largely fully comprised of no returning villains, with the exception of Sutek at the very end. And when I say returning villains, I don't necessarily mean all of them at once. I don't want to see all of them back at once, but I would like to see, similarly to what they did with RTD1, one main returning villain kind of taking the forefront. In this case, I think either the Cybermen or the Daleks. I wasn't expecting to miss the Daleks particularly after this series, but I have to be honest, I kind of did. I was one of those people who always thought the Daleks returning every year felt a little bit unnecessary, and to a certain extent I do still agree with that. But I do think the first encounter with the Daleks for a Doctor is a fundamental moment in their journey as the Doctor, and I think seeing Ncuti's Doctor, seeing the 50th Doctor come to blows with the Dalek is going to be really interesting. Personally, I am more of a Cyberman fan. That's why they got their place on the thumbnail, because personally, I also think that the Cybermen have a lot of potential that is untapped by even the show up to this point. And I think, given how Russell did Dot and Bubble particularly, and how he talked about social media and kind of incorporating the Black Mirror elements to it, I think if you add some of that Black Mirror flavour to the Cybermen, I think you could end up with something really special. There was an old parody Twitter account. It was called Cybus Industries, and the idea was it was like a parody company version of Cybus Industries in the real world, and they were kind of doing these tweets being like, oh, if you're going homeless, upgrade to cyber so you can stay warm and stuff like this. There's some really interesting ideas that you could do with the Cybermen, and I think they would fit really well into Russell's sort of new vision of the show. Speaking of Russell, though, my final kind of request for the new series, and this is one that we actually do know for a fact to a certain extent we are getting, is more new writers. Now, I believe Russell said in Doctor Who magazine that 4 of the episodes next year are going to be written by other writers, which is good, but we also don't know the ratio of how many of those are old writers and new writers. I mean, I'm going to assume, even though he said he's not doing a Series 15 or Season 2 episode, that Stephen Moffat will probably come back again, because I just don't trust him at this point. We already know he's back for Joy to the World. I would not be surprised if he was also back for a Season 2 episode proper, and, who knows, there could also be a return of someone we don't know yet, maybe Paul Cornell. I'd love to see that. But I also do think we need some more fresh voices. I think part of the reason Rogue felt quite refreshing is because you just got that sense of a different voice there. And I do think some new writers would be good, not only for freshness sake, because I do think that you kind of start to notice when the same guy has written the episodes multiple times, but also just for franchise longevity and beginning to train up eventually, and this is thinking very big picture, Russell's kind of successor once he leaves, because We don't really have a clear idea of how long Russell's going to stay yet, or what the plan is beyond Russell, but I think training up some people in the wings to be potential successors is something that he does need to think about going forwards. But those are the 5 key things I would like to see out of a Doctor Who Season 2. Whatever your thoughts are, drop them down in the comments below. Let's talk about it. If you did enjoy this video, please give a like, comment down below your thoughts, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.